So this lesson is going to be about 3D camera tracking and adding a 3D generated object into your video footage. To look something similar to this, this was the first time that I had really ever tried this in a serious manner, and it's not perfect, but I think it does all right. And so I would love if some of you all are able to accomplish this and put a 3D asset into a scene. And I think that this setup of like having a pedestal and putting something on it, sort of like an art object, I think that that's kind of interesting, and it is an easy way to approach this project. So showing you my folder structure: After Effects folder, Assets folder for my footage. I'm going to be using Cinema 4D, and a Renders folder that I can put things later. And I have already opened up After Effects. We'll go ahead and save it. All right. I'm going to import my footage. Just a side note, you can always check out things about footage if you right click and then go to Interpret Footage, Main. And here we can see information of the frame rate that we are set to, 29.97. That's good. All right, and the aspect ratio is 1920 by 1080. That's good. So I'm just going to, I can drag this down here and it should make a new comp. We'll call it Armory. That's fine. And this is my footage without the asset. You can see that I have placed this piece of paper that I made that has this sort of X on it and then some little circles. And camera tracking uses contrast. One of the things that it can use is contrast to help sort of pinpoint different locations in your footage. And so this isn't always necessary to have something like this, but I felt like, okay, I know that I'm going to have my object sitting on top of this footage, or I'm sorry, sitting on top of this area in the footage. The first thing that I'm going to want to do in this is I'm going to want to add something to help stabilize the footage just a little bit. So we can have stabilized footage with the effect Warp Stabilizer. I have to drag it on, and then it will do its thing. You can see up here the percentage that it is going through. Okay, and I typically don't really change any settings around here. I don't know a ton about this tool, I just know that it does help. And then after this, I want to bump the contrast up even more. So I'm going to add, I can do Lumetri. And I'm going to go to basic correction. We can bump up the contrast a little. I also like to come down into curves and really kind of adjust things more specifically, I suppose. That looks good. We can see what it looks like on and off. So this hopefully should help. And before we add the tracker on, we need to actually pre-compose it, because the tracker, if we want the tracker to actually read this footage that has warp stabilizer and the Lumetri color, it needs to basically be baked in, and we can do that by making it a pre-composition versus having it here on the layer. So I'm just going to take this one video footage that I have, and I'm going to say Precompose, and I'm going to call this stabilized. And in here, I would say move all attributes into new composition. So that means these effects will move into the new composition. Stabilized footage. And now you can see my effects are gone. But if I come into here, I double click on that layer, then I click here, you can see we have all of our effects. So now when we go back to our armory composition, anything that we do in this comp now is reading all that contrast and the stabilization. So that's good. So next thing I want to do is add the camera tracker. So in my effects and presets, I can search for 3D camera tracker, and it comes up. I'm going to place it on the footage, and now this also has to do its thing. So we can see up here the progress. So it's done with its tracking, and you can see all these little dots that have been added. And as we move, some of them turn on, some of them disappear, and so this is the error average. So ideally you actually want this a little bit lower, but I've used this footage as we saw, and it turned out all right. And so we're just gonna go with this right here. I'm going to grab some of these points. I'm going to click on it, and when I click on it, you see it turns yellow. I want to shift select multiple ones. You also see, okay, this little disc is appearing, and this disc is what is going to be our flat surface. So we want to find a spot where it looks like it is sort of within the scene. So if we were doing something on the side, maybe that might be fine. Up here, this is looking pretty good, but if we kind of move off a little, then we see it gets a little bit tilted, maybe not exactly what we want. But I think right here looks nice. So I can click some of these markers, shift select them, and whenever I click 3, then my disk is going to appear. As I click more, it might adjust the disk a little bit. There's no need to get the disk directly on top of this piece of paper that I have here. It's more about just 3 to 6 points, feeling like your disk is in a nice area, looks like it is flat on whatever surface you want to track. After that, we're going to right click, and we say create solid and camera. Oops, there we go. I had my caps lock on for some reason. So we created this solid now, and it is sitting in our scene. And if we were to play through, it looks like it's staying in the spot pretty well. I can make another, I believe. So if I wanted to just come in here, maybe select a few other ones. Let's just try these 3. Create solid. Let's turn off this one. We've made our solid, and what we can do is we can rotate, open up the track transformations, hit R, and now I can start to rotate my solid how I want. And of course I hit all the wrong rotations. I can scale it up, and I can hit position. And I definitely don't want to change the Y value because that's pushing it up and down. It doesn't have to be directly centered in the spot that you want it. But once it's larger, then let's watch it again and see if it sort of retains where it is placed. I think it's doing well enough for what we will need it for. Now I need to export this to Cinema 4D. I can do that by going to File, Export, Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter, and Cinema 4D Lite is part of After Effects, so you don't need to download anything extra. Of course, it does have limitations, but it is still a useful software. So right here it says After Effects, plug in Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter, 2D layers found. These will not be exported. So what that's referring to is down here we have this cube, and these are 3D layers. After Effects has the capability of having 3D layers, and we can see down here the layer that does not have a cube on it is our stabilized footage, which makes sense. That's not a 3D layer. And so it's just telling us right now that it's only going to track these 3D layers into Cinema 4D, or it's only going to export these layers into Cinema 4D. I want to put this, make sure that I put it in my spot. So Cinema 4D, I'm going to call it Armory, that's fine. And now I can go to that folder, open up my file, and you see I have my layers now in Cinema 4D. Now let's talk about this space a little bit. It's very similar to Maya, and it has different controls. However, that's one of the things that if you're working in Maya, you might find this a little bit frustrating because there are different controls. Over here, we can see our different assets that we have. We have our green layer and our red layer, and it concerns me a little bit that like maybe there's a slight tilt in between our layers, but that's okay. I'm just going to turn off the green one, and I'm going to make a cube. Let's see, so our cube has been placed over here, and the thing is, I want to make sure that we have to remember this layer right here that we have, this red solid, this is our surface. So if I want my cube to be laying flat on the surface, I have to rotate it. We can come up here to our rotate tool, or we can hit R. That one makes sense. So I'm going to rotate it, and then I'm going to come back to my move tool, which is E, and I'm going to slide it down, and I want to kind of see when it hits the intersection. of the red. So let's rotate it again. Move it again. Okay, that looks like it's sort of going through the red space all at the same time. Maybe a little bit over there, but to me, this looks good. And I want to scale it as well. So scale is T. And of course we need to move it again because I just scaled the width. Let's takes a moment to get used to all this. All right. And there's definitely better ways to do this. To be honest, I don't know much about navigating cameras in Cinema 4D, but I'm trying to learn more because Cinema 4D and After Effects, they speak to each other really well, which is something that like Maya and After Effects doesn't necessarily do. So okay, we've got our cube. I'm gonna come up here and hit save project. That's fine. We'll proceed. Now I want to come back to my After Effects file. And nothing has changed yet. That's all right. So I'm going to hit Command I. And I'm going to import my Armory Cinema 4D file. I'll hit Open. I have it over here. I'm going to turn off my solid, drag this down into my composition. We'll wait for a moment. And there we go. We see that I am overlaying my Cinema 4D file into my After Effects composition. If I come back to Cinema 4D and I turn off this red solid, now I hit save again, and then I come back to After Effects. My cube is in the space. I can come up to here to change this from draft to, which one is it? Current? Okay, nope, it was. Now if I play through, let's set this to half and let's play and see how it reads. And of course you could add any 3D object here. It doesn't have to be this cube. You can have the cube take up the entire space. But when you want to change this asset, you can't change it here in After Effects. I can't say, okay, I want to change the position. You'll see Max on Cinema 4D layer size must match composition. So you can't ever really change transformations in here. You always have to come back to Cinema 4D Lite and make adjustments in here. I can make a new material. I can just come down here, double click, and I can change the color. So let's make it red, reddish pink. And all I have to do is drag this up to my asset. It's red. I'm going to make this a little larger and also rotate it around. Let's see. Here we go. So there's a couple things that we would want to do to help this pink block that we have integrate into the scene much better. Look seamlessly integrated. And one thing, of course, is the lighting does not match right now. We should also sort of see if we can affect the grain of the footage. This is a little bit too clear and crisp, and the edges of the box they should be adjusted. That they're a bit too sharp. And then the shadow would be a big thing that would help if we could add a shadow down here. And unfortunately, in Cinema 4D Lite, I haven't quite figured out how to add a shadow. And if I could figure out a way in After Effects, that would be awesome as well. But I haven't figured that out. In the full version of Cinema 4D, there is something called a material called Shadow Catcher. And so it will be like a layer that has alpha and transparency and captures any shadows that you want. And so if you are interested in this, I would really recommend getting the full version. There's a student version that is only, I believe, around $3. And you get all of Cinema 4D, and then I think you also get some of Trapcode Particular, but I know it's a really cheap price. I think it's only about $3 because it's just like a transaction fee basically. And so I would recommend, if you're interested in this process of putting 3D objects into footage, try and download the whole thing and try and create a shadow as well. I know we have a lot of 3D artists in this class, so I think this could be something that could be really cool. Let's go into Cinema 4D, and first I just want to show you how we could adjust the edge, sort of like a bevel. It's called a fillet, and if we click on the cube, so click on cube or rectangle, and we bring up object down here, we have basic, the coordinates. This is one way in which we can change things. Of course, we don't want to change that. That will, if we go back and look at our red layer, now our cube is going through the surface of our red layer. So adjusting that is not great. But if we go into object and then we say fillet, that gives us a little bit of a softer edge on our object, and we could really round that up more if we want to make it like sort of nice and soft. And this, of course, gives us more subdivisions. We can see when it's low what it does, and we can take it up a little bit higher. And then I'm gonna try and add a light. So let's just say light. And I'll move it. And we want something that's kind of gonna match the armory a little bit. So let's try putting a light here, and then, sure. So I'm just gonna add another light. And it's back over here. Let's take it, I don't know, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit over towards here. File, save. Now let's go back into After Effects. Okay. Looks alright. These edges are way too dark. So we would need to continue to adjust our lighting. I kind of continued to work on it a little bit and I wasn't recording, so I just want to show you what I've done. Um, I have added some effects onto the top layer, the actual Cinema 4D object. I wanted to try and make a little bit of noise. Um, and so right up here I have noise HLS. If I turn it on and off, you can see what it's starting to do. It's giving me just a little bit of grain that I think helps whenever we composite it into the scene. So noise HLS helps just a little bit. We don't really want it to be visible. We just want to be able to have this very small amount of grain that's in the scene. There's other effects as well. You can come into here and go to noise and grain. Let's see what else happens. So we don't. That looks nice too. I imagine that this one takes a long time to render. And I also might take this down a little bit more. We wanted to change that to our final output instead of our preview, and the preview probably helps in the rendering speed. Yeah, we can see for sure the preview helps in the rendering speed, and then whenever we take this to final output, it's gonna take a chunk of more time to render. So that's another option. I'm just gonna delete that for now and have noise HLS. Then I thought it was too bright, so I desaturated it some. I added a hue and saturation. And then I just thought it was a bit too crisp and too clear, so I added a Gaussian blur. And that kind of just smooths it out a little bit. Maybe that's even too much of the blur. Maybe we could take this down to 3. We don't want it to actually be blurry. Like we don't want that. We just want to kind of soften it just barely, especially when we're zoomed out. Take this down. I think I liked the add noise more, or add grain more, even though our render time is gonna suck. Now, I had also mentioned that the shadow catcher, like having a shadow down here would be an issue, and we wanted to be able to figure out how to add a shadow. And I did figure out a way, but this really only works for the object that is directly on the surface. I added a new solid, and how I did that was I went to my stabilized footage, the camera tracker up here, and I just went and I kind of found a circle that I felt like matched my rectangle that I have on here. And if I right click, I can say create solid, and this is placed above our Cinema 4D file. We can drop it down below, And then I went into here, hue, saturation, and I dropped it down all the way to black. Then I just scaled it up, and you can drag on here onto this controller that you see, and you could start to reposition it, and doing a little bit of that would be nice. Let's get to it. I can move along to get to a better angle to grab the Y. And then here what I did was I made a mask, and it's hard to, that's a hard color mask to see. Let's change this to green. Okay, that's better, I suppose. Now I'm gonna take my pen tool, and I was finding that this seemed more challenging than usual to grab the edge. So if I just hover directly on top, we see I can add a point. So I'm gonna take that point, bring it in around, and just going around, just barely on the edge. Let me turn off the one that I already did. So I have that. I might need to bring this in a little bit more. And then I went to opacity. I dropped it down just a little bit, but it still has too hard of an edge, so I go to Gaussian blur, and I can bump this up a little. I might want to round off that edge of the mask up there, and maybe I could keep taking this up. I worked a little bit on one already. The one I have here. Maybe this looks alright. Maybe the spill is a little bit too high on this. I don't know. Right here. I took that up to 70. So a square sort of rectangle thing, this is not very exciting. And you all could do something that is a lot more exciting than this. And also consider the fact that whatever you have here on this podium, it could also animate, or not necessarily on this podium, but anywhere that you're trying to track and add a asset, it could potentially animate. So let's go back into Cinema 4D real fast. And I just want to do a tiny little bit of animating. So a couple things. This up here switches between different views. This can definitely be helpful. And I could drag my cube and come back in here. If I select a object, which this is my cube, and then I hit F, that's going to take me directly up to it. Let's find this cube again. And so in order to keyframe in After Effects, in Cinema 4D, we can select our object that we want to move, and then I can come over to here, press this button, and it sets a keyframe where my playhead is. So actually that's not what I wanted. I can just drag this keyframe and I can take it all the way back. Let's just put it at the beginning. And then by the time we get over here, let's have our little cube move over here. I'll hit keyframe again, that will make another mark. now I want to move it a little bit more towards the front. And okay, to be honest, now this is I'm I get a little bit confused here, and I wish so. Our object is moving relative to the like actual plane in Cinema 4D, not the plane that we are surfacing on. So I needed to move it out on the z-axis, and then I would also need to move it on the y-axis. And I'm sure that there is a way to not have it behave like this, but that's what we're doing for now. And so I hit keyframe again. Actually, I'm gonna Command Z that. It was out a little bit too far. I didn't want it to be quite that far out. So let's do the same thing and bump it over and that looks about right. So let's make another keyframe. And then I want to move it back sort of towards its original spot. Okay, so let's add a color to this. Let's make it orange. Let's hit File, Save. And now we can see as our footage moves, we are going to have our shape move as well. The last thing I forgot to mention actually was we don't need to have this contrast up anymore. We could have taken the contrast back down to the original footage a long time ago. After we made that tracking and after we have made the tracking data, when we first got this track and the solid, we could have jumped back in here and we could have selected this. And now I can turn off my Lumetri color and I can come back in here and I can see how I like it if I want to use that less contrasty footage. It definitely, I think we need to definitely adjust our hue and saturation of our asset though. I think it's too saturated. Maybe that's a bit better. So I think the final result is okay. There's definitely a few moments where the tracking is a little bit off, but for the most part, I think this is really great. And I would be really excited to see you all try and work with this. I know that you all could do a lot more interesting things than just this, something like this cube. If you wanted, you could also. I'm also happy for you to grab a model off of Turbo Squid and use that model instead, and kind of see how that goes. So, uh, good luck.